I started working on a project that needs to have perfectly tight joints between the parts. And the tricky part is that all the angles are a little bit odd, so it's very difficult to cut those accurately on a miter saw. But then I remembered an old carpenter's trick where you would cut the joint roughly to begin with, then put the parts together, recut the joint, and that way the parts would fit perfectly together. So I gave it some thought and I came up with an idea for a sled to do that on a table saw. I'm starting with the base, got a piece of 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. I need to make some holes and slots with recesses in the base, and there are a number of ways I could do that, but I have the CNC, so I thought I would use it. And then while the CNC is working for me, I can work on something else, namely the cleat that rides in the miter slot in my table saw. This is a situation where you want to sneak up on the fit so that you wind up with a cleat that doesn't have any slots. Then I could take the base off the CNC, and here are the bolts that I'll be using. They're special. They're made for this type of slot. Next, I need some hold down clamps, and I've got some of my scrap hickory flooring. I can make those from. These are 1/2 inch thick. Just cut the length and rip it down the middle. And once again, I'll be putting that on the CNC to mill out the slots in that. And in the meantime, I can get that cleat glued onto the base by positioning the fence at the right distance so that the blade cuts right down the middle. And I'll let that glue set for about an hour, and then I'll add some 3/4 inch screws to make sure that it stays in place. And now I'm fastening the fence, but I see the mistake I made almost immediately. I had the wrong end, so I flipped it around and finished screwing that on. And of course that means that the guide cleat that I glued and screwed on is also on the wrong side. So I pried that off and went through the same routine of gluing it on the other side, let it dry, and then drive in the screws. The 2 bolts right up at the front of the sled are fastened permanently in place up in the recess, and then the other 2 are free to ride back and forth in the slot. Now, one of the reasons I needed this jig was to make this cut right here, but I can see right away that it's not going to work. So I had to make an alteration right off the bat. And this is to give it a little bit more range towards the center. And now I can get the piece put back in and actually make the cut. You can see now that the marks that I made on the piece line up at the slot. What I'm doing here is I'm drawing some square lines across to line up the parts that I need to cut, those odd angles I was talking about. And you can see that right here. You can see that they fit together, but not perfectly. So this is going to fix that. I'll put the first piece in, line it up with the mark I made, and then tighten down the clamping bar, and then get the other piece in. And the idea here is that it's going to cut both pieces at the same time. So you can leave a little gap in between, but not very much. And you can see that that is super tight. Now, a couple days went by and I thought up some improvements. First was to add these nuts to the sliding bolts so that they wouldn't fall out anymore. And you can see that I actually cut 2 more slots and I made 2 more clamping bars towards the outside. I really wasn't very comfortable with just one clamping bar holding down each part, so I added these. The 2 extra bars do something else as well. They hold the parts down tighter to the bottom of the sled, and that improves the accuracy of the cut. Yet another improvement that I thought up was adding a nice straight fence to the front to replace those lines that I drew. This makes it so that I can take the part and push it right up tight against this fence and not have to waste time eyeballing it on the line. Another improvement, or maybe addition is probably the best way to describe this, is to make these perfect 45-degree guides using my very precise miter guide that I made recently. And what these allow me to do is recut perfect miters on this sled as well. These will just slide in up tight against that straight fence that I put in, and then to hold them in place I'm just going to use dowels as pins so that I can easily take them out and put them back in. And here I'm rough cutting a piece of 2x4 on my miter saw, and I know that this is not exactly 45 degrees because that miter saw doesn't cut perfect 45 degrees anymore. But when I put it in the jig and I recut the joint, not only is it a perfectly tight joint, it's also perfectly 90 degrees. It doesn't get any better than that.